that's a great introduction. You give me too much praise. It's not that spectacular, but I suppose if you've been driving a 2012 Leaf with only 70 k's of range for years on end, you probably would find it exciting to have more. So tonight's chat is about, and I've titled it not just upgrading, but the evolution of the Nissan Leaf battery design. Because if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have done it. They actually did 90% of the work themselves. They just put a few spanners in the works. I'm going to put that over there for the moment to make it a little tricky for you. So back in 2011, Nissan released their first Nissan Leaf, and it had a battery with 24 kilowatt hours of capacity. I understand the usable capacity of that battery was 20 or thereabouts. I haven't found all of the details, and the actual range of the vehicle was around 100 to 120 kilometres with that. Battery was constructed around 48 cell modules, and so looking at this picture, you've got a big battery assembly, and then you've got 48 modules assembled in one big row across the back, and 4 smaller stacks of cells laid flat. Each cell module looks like this in the original, and it contained 4 pouch cells, and it was 66 amp hours at 8.4 volts, 500 watt hours per module. So the battery is at nearly 400 volts when it's fully charged, and it was wired, those 4 pouch cells inside were wired in series parallel, so 2 in parallel in series with another 2 in parallel. And that's why it's got 3 terminals on the end of the battery pack: positive, tap at the middle, and negative. That battery pack didn't age well. In fact, it was a disaster for Nissan. Lots of recalls and so forth. It didn't perform well in cold and hot weather, and it degraded rapidly. Its composition was, let's see, lithium manganese oxide. So it was very early technology, and those batteries aged pretty quickly. In 2013, Nissan woke up and decided they'd try a better battery chemistry, and they went to what they called the lizard cell, and all of the future batteries from this point for the Nissan Leaf have had the same lizard cell, lithium nickel cobalt manganese oxide, and it looks a little bit different because they got rid of some aluminium and put some plastic in there, but the construction's the same and the capacity's the same as well. Those cells lasted pretty well. They're still in cars today, and they're still doing better than the original 2012. That was the details of the chemistry and construction changes. There's your newer NMC, random molecules in the old one. So in 2016, Nissan made further changes to the battery technology by using the new NMC cell with greater energy density and merging 2 modules into a single frame. So there's your 2 original 2013 module style. They crammed them together and took out a couple of sheets of metal and ended up with a slightly better capacity battery as well. Made a 30 kilowatt hour battery in 2016. Then in 2018 they again changed the battery, and this is the one that I've got now. In 2018 the battery whoops, hang on, I've gone too many steps. In 2018, still the same battery construction. 24 modules because they're the same as the 30 kilowatt hour. Still laid out the same, still lots of wasted space down the middle of the battery, and the same metal box, same mounting bolts. 40 kilowatt hour battery, so from 2012 to 2018 they've doubled the capacity of the battery. And it's the same weight, within 10-15 kilos. Okay, Nissan weren't finished with battery design yet. You will also notice in this photo that I've noted the plugs on the battery. In 2013 they changed it all. They used a higher density connector for the data connection. The high voltage DC connection was the same, but they also put in a connector for the PTC heater. And then they went on. 2019, they made the most significant changes to the Leaf battery, and these are the last changes they did. All the wiring in the pack was upgraded. Oops, hang on, let's do this again. This clicker is clicking too fast, and it's mine, not Eric's, it's my fault. So, different modules, 3 stacks of different heights, and basically 4 of those stacks across in each part of the pack. All the wiring is flat bus bars, and they're laid over top of the battery cell modules. A lot higher density. The battery only gets about 20 millimetres deeper top to bottom. They've crammed it in really tight. The only downside was that although it got 20 millimetres deeper top to bottom, it got from 300 kilos-ish to 410. So the battery mounting system was also changed. This is the first time. You'll see here the older battery design had these lugs sitting out the side. On the newer one, the frame of the battery was made a bit wider. It can still be bolted underneath the older car, but you've got to have a couple of special adapter rails, and then the plastic undercovers underneath the vehicle don't fit in the older car. There's got to be a custom cover made. People overseas are doing this change and actually putting 62 kilowatt hour packs in the 2012, but they have to do a fair bit more work to do it. They've got to change the springs in the car as well. Okay, well that's all the easy bit about changing batteries and how they evolved. The downside is the battery talks to the car in gibberish. Now, Nissan's battery manager, it's pretty complex system of cells, a battery management system that's capable of monitoring all the cells and the temperatures and the balance of the cells and so forth. And it communicates to the rest of the vehicles using gibberish up there. And Nissan weren't just settled with making gibberish and leaving it at that. They went through 5 evolutions of gibberish, or 5 dialects. So you've got gibberish versions 1 to 5. And fortunately for those of us who want to change batteries around, some clever people here and there throughout the world have managed to reverse engineer gibberish versions 1 through to 5 and have developed what's called a CAN bus converter or a battery translator. And I've got one here that you can pass around. That one's made over in Christchurch in New Zealand by our neighbours, AEVA's Enhanced. It costs a lot of money, and it comes with a little cable patch set because, of course, in 2013 they went from a 22-pin data connector to a 36-pin, and of that they only use about 12 and they're all the same pin numbers. Don't know why they did it, but they did. And so it's possible via these CAN bus translators to make a newer battery work in the older car. Essentially, gibberish versions 1 through to 5, they started simplifying the communication protocol and left out some messages that were all there in the older vehicle and the older vehicle insists on. So Daniel Oster and Muxan in the Netherlands and Finland, and also AEVA's Enhanced in parallel, don't think they talk to each other, these 2 groups of people, developed and reverse engineered all that gibberish and worked out how to create these translators. Okay, so let's talk about motivation to upgrade. This is my car as of about January this year. You'll see on the right hand side the gasometers reading for the car when the battery was full. roughly 79 kilometres, unless I'm going down a hill or Mike's driving, then it'll only be 65. On the left is a device that was developed by a chappie in New Zealand to actually tell you in the Gen 1 Leaf what the real range and capacity is most likely to be. And the battery was down to 12.5 kilowatt hours. So it didn't go very far and didn't go very fast, and it charged slowly, and unless Eric was driving it, it probably wouldn't go very far. So what do you need to do? Step one, this is my 12-step program for getting a new battery in the car. Step one, get a battery. If you're in America or in Northern Europe, piece of cake. The batteries are a dime a dozen, they're everywhere. Here in Australia, hen's teeth. Hard to import, almost impossible to import. They cost a fortune. I spent quite a lot of money, shouldn't have spent it. The wife still doesn't forgive me. She does know. And you have to get a battery that's in good health, and that is also a challenge. Fortunately, these people who are clever and worked out how to reverse engineer all the battery communication also developed a cool little app for Android phones and iPhones called Leaf Spy that helps you read the state of the battery and look at the condition of the cells. So the clever people can go and get Leaf Spy, and you can actually make an adapter, which I've made but I didn't include in my slideshow, of that being plugged straight into a raw battery and firing up an OBD reader and talking to Leaf Spy and getting your battery condition. So I did get a battery. It came from a gentleman who lives out the other side of town who, by some miracle, managed to import a 40 kilowatt hour pack from Japan without it getting stolen by customs, and it had a health of 88%. Trouble is, not long after he bought it and put it in his car, the car got involved in a crash and was written off. And so it sat around in his yard for a long time, and he eventually offered it up on the Facebook Leaf owners page, and I looked at it and said, no, you're too expensive. And my brother talked to him and we wished him well at selling it, and he didn't sell it, so he dropped his price. And so I told my wife that it was lower price than it actually was, and I went and bought it. So there it is on the trailer being collected from his house. So step two, you got to make some adapters up. Now I decided, because that CAN bus translator needs work done on the body management controller in the car as well to be able to make the new battery work. I didn't want my car to be off the road for a fortnight while I sent the BMC over to Christchurch. So I bought the cheaper option, which was Daniel Oster's CAN bus converter. That's this fella down the bottom. It's a box that's about half the size of a pack of cigarettes. And I hacked into the battery comms cable down underneath the centre console and put in a pair of plugs. That gets me the CAN bus converter inside the car, where it's safe from the weather and it's easy to get at, so I can pull it out, and if Daniel changes the code in the programming, I can pull the thing out of the car and take it inside, hook it on the laptop and upgrade the software. Cool. And it only cost me $200. But I also had to make an adapter for underneath the car where the battery comms cable goes. So a couple of purchases from wonderful AliExpress, and cross your fingers and see if it arrives, and sooner or later I got a plug with a bundle of wires on it, and I got another plug that didn't have a weatherproof connector, so I 3D printed a little shell for it and wound the whole lot up in self-amalgamating rubber and made up a weatherproof connector. Good to go. Step 3, get hold of a mate with a hoist. I did invite my mate with a hoist, Tony, to come tonight, but he hasn't made it. I believe he's still on his way back from the long-distance Mallee. That was my friend Tony Edmonds.
He doesn't want more mates, that's why he didn't come.
Possibly so, yeah. How I got Tony to do this, I'm still puzzled, because either he really likes me or he secretly wants to get an electric vehicle sometime. Tony has this workshop set up specifically to do up classic cars and old cars to boot. But he's let me put the car in his workshop and up on that hoist 3 times. He and I have pulled the original battery out twice. And we manually balanced the cells on it back then. So, back it up into Tony's workshop and away we go. Make things safe. This is inside the car. This is the battery safety disconnect plug. You wear your rubber gloves, your 1000-volt rubber gloves, not like this guy. And it wasn't me, I got that from the internet, because I forgot to take my photo. And you pull that up out the middle of the car and the battery goes dead. There's no way in the world you can get power out of that battery once that plug's been pulled out. That plug sits in the transmission hump between the back seats and the front seats. Okay. Then you get your car up on the hoist, you disconnect your high voltage connector, again with your 1000-volt gloves, just in case even pulling that plug out didn't save you. And you undress the car, take its under panels off. There's 3 of them underneath the car there that cover all that up. And there's your battery hanging by 8 bolts in the middle under the floor of the car. So, you raise the car up, you undo all the connections. There's the data plug being unplugged and the 22 pin sitting out there. And in our case, we got a bunch of pallets and stacked them up and put casters on the bottom and lowered the car back down onto the pallets. Undid all the 8 bolts, lifted the car up again. The battery sat on the floor, like that. Wasn't hard to do. We then got the hoist and dragged that battery out off the pallets. We were going to just roll the pallets out, but I realised after I'd made it that Tony's cable hump in the middle of the hoist wouldn't let me, so we used the motor hoist to drag the battery out to the yard. Here's Tony wrangling the new battery out of the trailer with the old battery sitting over the back there. We had fun and games doing that bit because he only had slings for hanging it sort of diagonally. So I sat on one end and we rolled it back in. Once you've got your battery out, you can get to and wire up some more bits. This is our little battery adapter cable going in there. And then you line your battery up, your new battery up underneath. Still uses the same bolt holes. In some people's cars they found they had to open out 2 mounting lug holes at the back end of the car, but in my case it worked without that. Don't know why, but it did. Lower the car down, put the 8 bolts back in, lift it back up. Here we go, new battery in underneath. Data connector tidied up in there. So 40 plus pins there and the connection with the 22 pin over there. High voltage still not plugged in, and you'll see that the previous owner of this battery had already put in a defeat plug where the PTC heater connection goes in the later model cars. It's just a 4-pin header that bridges a connection that says, hey, I've got a heater on it, so that the battery controller doesn't have a hernia. And away you go. So we've got that bit done. Now, it all looked really good at that point. We lowered the car back down after we put its under pants back on, and we took off for a quick drive to test it. And we got about 100 metres down the road and realised the car was in creep mode. What I'd forgotten to do was that this and threw one more spanner in the works. The battery is uniquely identified by its BMC, and you can't grab one battery out of one car and just shove it in another car. The car won't like it. It'll say, P3102, I don't know you. whose battery did you come from? Fortunately, EVs Enhanced provide a battery pairing tool which just plugs into the OBD port, and you click the button after you turn the car on, and you wait 5 seconds and hold your breath and then turn the car off, and you pull it out and you turn the car on and it all works. It does battery pairing. But Daniel Oster and a couple of other clever guys over in Finland worked out the pairing protocol, and they didn't steal it from EVs Enhanced. And so they added it to Leaf Spy. So in Leaf Spy you read DTCs, that's the trouble codes, and it comes up and says you've got a P3102, and it pops up this extra screen and says you can pair the battery. So you press the button, reads the battery serial number out of the battery controller, squirts it back into the body management controller, and Bob's your uncle. So that worked, and here's what happened. That's the gasometer being very optimistic. I've had it higher than that. It's gone to 302. That was after coming down the hill from Tony's place. But very happy with that. The real range, more like 210, 220 kilometres. You'll see that this is saying 175%. Now that only happens if you're putting an upgraded battery in a 2012 or a 2011. If you use a 2013 model and forward, it actually reads the battery capacity from the battery instead of guessing on what's programmed into the body management controller. So it says 175% there. That's actually 88.3% of the new battery's capacity, because that's what its health is, and 33 kilowatt hours usable in the battery. I'm pretty happy with that. And that's the end of the story. And so for about $12,500, I've managed to get 3 times the range out of the car. It's a bit less than 3 times if you drive fast, like I did going out to Newry-Utput, and coming back I only got 150, 160 k's out of it. But it's a Gen 1 car, it's not that efficient on its use of power, and I'm pretty satisfied. What's happening with the old battery? Well, I did offer it around and put it on Gumtree and eBay and everywhere. Now I couldn't really get anyone to buy it, and then my ever hopeful brother decided he'd buy it, and we're turning it into a stationary battery pack to run solar at his house. So the weekend before last, we stripped the original battery and we stacked all the cells up in a cabinet, and if Graham Manietta gets back to me soon with a price on an Orion BMS, we're going to hook it up as a 48 volt battery system with about 13 kilowatt hours, which is the same as a Tesla Powerwall, and hook it up with Victron inverter and solar charger, and he's going to charge his Nissan Leaf off it instead of off the house. Probably mostly during summer, because he won't get 13 kilowatt hours out of 3.5 kilowatts of solar in the winter. But it's a good chance. And he's going to pay me for it too. Thanks, guys.
There might be some other questions.
Questions? Oh yeah, I can do questions. I can do some questions. Are there any questions? Richard?
You mentioned the PTC connector. Is that a positive thermocouple?
That's the heater in the car, and they call it a PTC heater. God knows why it's called PTC.
And it's not connected?
Well, no, in the older car, the PTC heater was driven from the main 12 volt, main 400 volt cable, not from a separate one. Why they changed the connections and ran the heater on its own circuit later on, I don't know. It still uses the same isolation contactors inside the battery. There's still the same 3 contactors that click in when you power up the car. So, don't know.
Can you use it when it looked like it was patched out?
It's patched out because in the older car you don't need that connection. The power for the heater's coming through the main cable. And you can use the heater until it breaks. They're not very reliable in the old car. It's just a hot wire heater in a ceramic cartridge. and they do suffer from electrical earth grounding and leakage and stuff. Yeah.
Your mates in New Zealand have got the CAN bus translator.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the old Tesla batteries can get a Modbus to do CAN bus translator,
Mm-hmm.
so they can use their old batteries as home batteries without unpacking and repacking.
Yep. And in fact, that's actually being done. I haven't got a slide for you with that, but the ever clever Daniel Oster and his mates over in Finland have done exactly the same thing for the Leaf battery. What's the brand name? There's a particular brand of solar inverter, I'll think of it in a minute, it's not coming to me right now, that they partnered with BYD and actually developed a battery system for high voltage DC battery with BYD. Oh, Fronius Gen 24 it was. This particular inverter has a battery connection which will pair with a BYD household battery. What Daniel has done is done Modbus to CAN bus using what's called a LilyGo board, and you can find it online. They set the battery on the floor or bolt it to the wall on its side and whack in the LilyGo board between the Leaf's CAN bus and the Modbus interface on the Gen 24 Fronius inverter, and you can do exactly that. You just patch your high voltage straight into the high voltage battery thing, and they're also working on adapting it for the Tesla packs, so that you can use a raw Tesla pack, as well as I think they're doing it. I can't remember which one it is. There's another manufacturer's battery as well. I just can't remember which one it is, but they're well down the road. They've got a how-to already on Daniel's website and the GitHub page with all of the instructions and data about how to do it. Keith and I decided we wouldn't do that because here in South Australia, I don't think it's a really good idea legally to go sticking a 400 volt battery pack on possibly grid connected stuff. Just at the moment, I don't think SA Power Networks would like you very much. What we're doing with Keith is playing it double safe. We're doing it completely off grid and at 48 volts on the battery side. All the high voltage side, the 240 volt side, will be done by an electrician to code. Likewise, the solar will be done to code, but the battery will be something that we've done the same way as a lot of other people have with a Fronius 48 volt inverter. Any other questions? Yes?
The funny thing is, if you're going to make that part of the system off-grid, don't worry about doing it with code. You're going to do that for your own sake.
Well, the code's good, that's why we're doing it.
Yeah. Because the electricity authority...
Yeah, they don't have any jurisdiction.
Have authority to plug into the grid.
Yeah, we know that. It may eventually become grid connected down the track, we don't know. Yes, Eric? No, wrong one. Mike, dyslexic.
Important question. Now that you've got more amp hours in the car, you get less battery stacks. So does the car go better?
Yes, it does actually. And in fact, that was a selling point when I was getting it reinsured after I'd upgraded it. One of the questions that Shannon's wanted to know was, did it go faster? And I said, yes, its acceleration has improved quite a bit. It's also made a terrific difference to the regen braking. The old pack barely did any regen braking. I'd have to have the battery almost completely dead flat before I came down the hill on the way home from Noarlunga before I'd get any regen, and it wouldn't really hold the car back. Now you get to 80% of the battery, regen's up full, and you can go down the hill and it'll hold it at 80 k's the whole way down. It was brilliant. I did it even from Wollonga Hill the other day. So it really makes a huge difference. Yes?
I'm surprised that all the tens of thousands of Nissan Leafs that have been sold in Europe, but people over there aren't putting bigger batteries in them. Do you know anything about
Well, they're doing that.
But why can't you get the...
A third-party battery, are you talking about? No, there's because the 40 and 62 kilowatt hour packs are so cheap over there in Europe. It doesn't appear anyone's particularly interested in brute forcing and building third-party packs with even more capacity than the 62. There's also a lot more legislation affecting them in Europe, and one of the reasons that is also one of the reasons why Daniel Oster, he calls himself Dalla, won't develop. You can take that out, Eric. I don't need it. Won't develop a brute force design so that you can take, say, BMW i3 cells or cells out of another brand of car and whack them into a Nissan shell and stick them in your car. Here in Australia and over in New Zealand, that's happening. Only a week ago, Graham Manietta up in Queensland announced he'd finished developing his 50 kilowatt hour pack using CATL cells, which is a complete replacement for the Nissan Leaf, and it's $19,000 worth installed, so he tells us. EVs Enhanced in New Zealand have they've got their 50 kilowatt hour pack on the market using BYD blade cells, and they have reverse engineered and developed their own battery controllers. It appears they can get away with it, whereas in Europe, A, there's not the appetite, and B, there's some legislative hassles about it.
The UV is very strict.
Yeah,
That's their road authority, and everything needs to be crash tested. Any modification that is major structure or major component is huge testing requirements.
yeah,
Even for low volume.
yeah. That's why that these guys are using an already designed Nissan pack for their upgrades rather than a third party. Something I omitted to mention throughout all of this, and the reason I wouldn't necessarily recommend... No, shut up, Ray. I'll get someone upset with me if I say it. Look, Nissan haven't got thermal management in their battery packs. You would have noticed in those pictures that there were no water pipes there, no coolant lines, no nothing. This is the one weakness of the Nissan battery pack, and really the only weakness in the car's design. And so in hot weather, if you charge the battery fast and you do it too many times in a day, like any more than 2, your battery will get too hot. It's going to cause a real problem with its lifespan. Likewise, in really cold weather, it doesn't get preheated before charging. That doesn't do it any good either. You know, it's got its place, but it's not the perfect car. Yes.
Have you convinced your brother Keith to upgrade his battery?
I think he'd do it if he could find one. He's sort of prodding me to go and keep talking to Graham Manietta and see if Graham wants me to do battery conversions for him down in South Australia. I think I've got the skills for it, and I just haven't got a hoist that I can reliably...
As long as Tony's available.
Yeah, and look, I don't want to put Tony out. It's been a trade of favours between us. I fix old radiograms and things for him, and he and I muck around with cars together. So, yeah, I think between EVs Enhanced and Graham Manietta's batteries, I think they're a good solution going forward for people. But they're going to have a real struggle if the new Chinese vehicles keep coming down in price. You know, where do you say it's worthwhile doing it? My wife didn't think $12,500 was a good price for my battery. That's fair enough. I'm a nerd and I just got enthusiastic about it, and like most people, we buy things because we want it, not because it makes economic sense. It's extended the life of the car, no question. Yes.
Well, that leads me to my question. I can't help but admire people like you. It's just sensational what you've done. Maybe it's the wog in me on the stick as a brick sometimes, but I look at the making money side of it, which is once these batteries, like you said, you couldn't get rid of it. You know, I sort of read up on companies. I think in was it Canada or somewhere, I read up that the big industry coming out is recycling the batteries, right? So I'm thinking to myself, well, how can I get involved in something like that? What's involved in doing something like that? I'd probably blow myself up pulling a battery apart, right, without my gloves on. I'm just asking you, well, how do you see the recycling side of that? Because you couldn't actually get rid of that. Are you able to, with your knowledge, pull cells apart and break up the lithium and break up the magnesium?
No.
And what does it take, or who, and what sort of business?
Well, to my knowledge, there's 2 companies here in Australia who have experimental plants already up and running, breaking packs down, and they basically grind the cells down into, well, it's not powder, it's sort of a paste, but they break them up and then they send the metals off overseas for reprocessing. Nissan themselves here in Australia are doing what my brother and I are doing essentially, or what Daniel Oster's done in Finland. They're taking used Nissan Leaf packs. When you go out to Nissan down the road at Tonsley and take your car in and ask them to change the battery over, they'll do a like for like swap for you for 10 grand, 10,800. I don't really see the value in that because it doesn't get the car going any further. What happens to the old pack when it's traded in, that's part of that price, is they take it back to their plant in Victoria and they are using them as stationary batteries in a large array in Victoria. And that's happening all around the world. People are taking Nissan packs. I've seen a photo of a Nissan factory battery system that had something like 20 packs in it. And that can keep going on ad infinitum. They can just keep building them up bigger and bigger. Once the batteries come out of a car, in my case it was about, 65, 66% state of health. That's 66% of its original capacity, 13 kilowatt hours. That's really quite usable still. And in a domestic situation on a house where you might only draw 5 kilowatts out of it, you might only put 5, 6, 7 kilowatts into it at a time with your solar. Perfect. Light usage. The battery will last a very long time like that. It won't degrade rapidly like it does in a car. So yeah, the recycling industry is growing. There's a lot of naysayers around say, oh yeah, but you're going to have this mountain of waste. I don't see it that way. All the news that I read, particularly in the driven and so forth, that's not what's happening. People are gearing up for it. There's 2 reasons they're doing that. One is because the raw materials cost more to get. Recycling it is easier to a degree. Once you get the technology right, there's no reason why you shouldn't be taking used batteries and recovering the raw materials and reprocessing them and making more batteries.
It's true that the raw materials that they extract out of the battery are actually stronger than the original. Something I heard that somewhere.
I don't know about that. No, I can't comment on that. Any other questions?
Yeah, there's one. Somebody else might be able to answer it if you can't. I've got a few dead Sky Energy cells that are they've just died. They don't do anything. They can't use them for anything. I'm at a loss to what to do with them. I'm presuming they can be also recycled, but probably not in the same way that Nissan do them. They're
No.
blue plastic things.
They would have to go to one of these companies that are breaking the batteries down and grinding them up.
And they're not in South Australia, are they?
There is one in South Australia. I can't remember their name and I don't know where they are. I have read about them, but I don't know the details. But yeah, they should be able to take them.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Ray. Our usual thank you taker.
I'm going to have to take that to Tony and give it to him. I couldn't have done it without him.